The doll moved. No wires, no tricks, just terror. Paranormal app brings you closer to cursed objects. Subscribe, if you dare. The Ghosts of Kirkee Bungalow. I was in the 4th grade when we shifted into that house. A sprawling colonial-era bungalow in Pune, Cantonment. Stone walls thick as fortresses, verandas wide enough for cricket, and ceilings so tall they echoed like voices of their own. Even as a child, I knew this house had outlived many lives before ours. We were a family of 5, plus one mischievous lad. My father was a major then, proud and orderly. My sisters were teenagers, forever awake with books and whispered laughter. I was the youngest, usually quiet, usually watching. The compound was wrapped in banyan trees, old giants with their roots dangling like ropes, their shadows stretching longer than the evenings themselves. They stood there like guards, though whether they kept things in or out, I never really decided. The first time I saw her, it was late afternoon. Sunlight was dripping through the glass panes, so I noticed a girl stepping through the front door. She had pale skin, dark braids, and wore a sky blue frock with layered hems, like something out of a photograph tucked away too long. She moved without sound, no creak of the gate, no turn of the latch. She just appeared as if the house had been waiting for her. She didn't glance at me. She walked straight past into the dining room where my mother was slicing cucumbers. I followed cautiously. From the doorway, I saw her standing quietly near the table, watching my mother the way one stares at a painting, still and intent and almost reverent. I whispered, "Ma," and the girl turned. In that single instant, she darted toward the kitchen and vanished. My mother looked up puzzled and said, "What happened?" "Who was that girl?" I asked. "What girl?" she replied. She searched the kitchen at once, every corner, every pot. Nothing. The back door was shut tight. The counters untouched. No sign she'd been there at all, actually. I saw the girl a handful of times again. Never close, never speaking, always half hidden, always watching my mother. She never looked at me again, and I never dared follow her. Our Labrador noticed things too. Gentle as she was, she'd often sit rigid in the drawing room like at night. It's while my sister studied, staring into empty corners like she was watching something invisible shift. She never lay down until they left the room. The bedrooms were enormous, with extra rooms just for wardrobes and tubs. Yet all 3 of us children slept in the same bed. The rest of the space felt too hollow and too cold, as if it was not meant to hold sleepers anymore. One night, my eldest sister, she woke to see a figure beside the bed. Not a girl this time, but a man, white and blurred like chalk smudged across glass. He held what looked like a cane and stood as though he was keeping watch. My other sister turned to look. She saw him too, and by then he was fading, like smoke dissolving into the dark. My sister whispered prayers, her hands trembling until the room felt lighter. And I, the fortunate one, slept through it all. Even my mother wasn't spared, because once when filling a jug at midnight, she heard a man laugh outside the kitchen window. A low, deliberate laugh. She fled to wake my father, who searched the compound with a torch and a dog. And the earth outside was damp from dew. No footprints and nothing disturbed. We stopped trying to explain. It was simpler to live with the house as it was. We told ourselves that we were not its first family and not its last. The Banyans had their roots around more than just soil. And yet I still think of that girl. She wasn't angry, she wasn't lost. She looked like someone remembering. Maybe she once stood in that dining room, watching her own mother, listening to the same hum of a knife against a chopping board. Maybe she was still waiting. Whispers in the Vent. The first weird thing happened in late 2022. I just turned 15. I was in the shower. That's when I clearly heard my mom calling my name. It wasn't muffled, but it came from inside the bathroom right next to me. I said, "Yeah?" But no one answered. They just... I kind of realized the door was still locked, and my mom and brother, even my cousin, I asked all of them if it was them, and they all swore up and down that it wasn't. A few months later, I had a nightmare. I ran to just sort of crash in my brother's bed, and he's kind of younger than me. He'd already gone to sleep in Mom's room. Too tired to care, I stayed anyway. Just as I was drifting off, I felt fingers, like actual fingernails, brush my hair back from my face, and I froze. When I finally opened my eyes, there was nothing. Sprinted straight to my mom's bed after that. Then came October 29th, 2023, 3:45 a.m. I shifted my blanket neatly, and suddenly the huge mirror above my desk started swinging like somebody'd pushed it. My phone was in my hand, so of course I texted my friends, which was a big mistake. While they were busy scaring me more, I felt something press hard into my back, enough to hurt. My stepdad later admitted he'd heard strange knocking around that time too. Then we fast forward to February 15th, 2025. My cousin, who's 12, my sister 14, and me 16, decided to mess with a homemade Ouija board made from printer paper and a bottle cap. We half believed it, half laughed, and when the thing moved, we accused each other, then got bored, and we let go without saying goodbye. Instantly, the lights flickered, and only the hallway ones. Never happened before. My sister tried to calm me down, but later admitted that that was the first time she'd ever seen them flicker like that. My phone also started buzzing nonstop. We tried recording, we gave up quickly. A few weeks later, my sister swore that she felt the same thing I did. That creepy touch pushing her hair aside. She also heard her mom's voice calling when Mom wasn't even awake. She used to laugh at me, but after that she looked genuinely shaken. Since then, we've all caught glimpses of strange things. Tall shadows and weird shapes in corners, and even a massive bat flapping around the ceiling once. Our cousin saw it too. And yeah, one relative who came back from jail believed a demon was following him. Though honestly, he might have just been unwell. The most recent thing happened literally last night. July 22nd, 2025. Just past 4 a.m. I'm texting friends about the shadow I'd seen the night before. That's when I heard faint mumbling through the vent. Our vents connect all the rooms, so voices carry, but this sounded wrong, like my mom and sister's voices were layered together. And right then, my phone volume started going up and down on its own. I phone case made it nearly impossible to do that by accident. I was so terrified I ran to my mom's bed. And as I searched on how to know if your house is haunted, my dog started pacing the room and suddenly pooped on the floor. Perfect timing. Honestly, I don't know if I'm haunted or just losing my mind, because nothing ever happens at my dad's place. Only at my mom's apartment. Mom and stepdad still think I'm exaggerating, but my sister is on my side now, and my cousin is half convinced. I haven't slept properly in days, and I don't even want to step inside my sister's room. That's where we messed with the board after all. The Midnight Lesson. For as long as I can remember, my family and those of my closest friends, they've carried their own strange encounters with the unexplained. Maybe that's why none of us thought twice when curiosity led us somewhere we probably shouldn't have gone. It was a lazy Saturday night. It's when I was with my usual crew, Cameron and Riley. Cameron's dad is notorious for his weekend ghost hunting expeditions. He has a trunk full of paranormal gadgets, like some kind of supernatural toolbox. Riley, always a thrill seeker, had been pestering us for weeks to try it ourselves. Just 2 blocks from Cameron's house stood a long abandoned elementary school. The place had a reputation that made most neighbors cross the street rather than pass its gates. Stories whispered of a janitor who disappeared there one winter evening, never found except for his keys left hanging in the gym. The school shut down within the year. So naturally, we decided that that was the perfect place to test our bravery. And at midnight, of course. The moment we stepped through the cracked front doors, it was like walking into a freezer. The hall smelled of mildew and chalk dust. We scattered Cameron's dad's equipment, an EMF reader in the old music room, a motion sensor in the gym, and for reasons I still don't understand, a cracked Ouija board on the desk in room 14. We started with the spirit box in the library. Riley asked the usual questions like, "Is anyone here, and what's your name?" While I kept thinking I saw flickers of movement between the shelves, and at the time I chalked it up to nerves. On my way back to room 14 to grab the flashlight, I froze, and at the end of the corridor stood a tall figure, still as a statue. My first thought was a cop, maybe catching trespassers, but when I blinked, the hall was empty. And trying to convince myself I imagined it, I stepped into room 14. That's when I saw something that hadn't been there before. Children's drawings taped to the backboard, like stick figures in crayon, all violently scribbled over with red X's. And the Ouija board, that was out of its box. Planchette resting squarely on the word yes, and none of us had touched it. My stomach dropped. I ran back breathless to Riley and Cameron. They laughed it off, accusing me of trying to scare them, and honestly, for a second, I almost believed I'd gone crazy. But then, the spirit box crackled to life with a single word, deep and guttural, unmistakable: leave. We didn't need more encouragement. We started collecting the equipment, trying to act calm, but when we returned to room 14 for the Ouija board, the air felt colder. And we saw him. A man-shaped shadow stood against the far wall. Not solid, not smoke, but something in between, like static stretched into human form. His face was indistinguishable, but I swear his head toward us just slightly. None of us said a word, none of us moved. and then in a blink he was gone. That night marked the first time we went ghost hunting. 3 months later, we still do at the school. We haven't stepped foot inside that again. Not yet. The Night at Miskin Manor. So picture this. It's 2021. Not too long ago, but just long enough that my memory can add a little dramatic polish. I'm in South Wales, and there was, note the past tense, a hotel called Miskin Manor. Lovely old place. 4 stars, a spa in the works. I once stayed there for a dull corporate training session, but only afterwards learned that apparently I'd been bunking with ghosts. Local tales whispered about a gray lady drifting through the old bar, plus the occasional child-sized specter scampering about. Naturally, I'd seen none of this, so I did what any sensible modern adult does. I hit YouTube, and sure enough, I found shaky videos of ghost hunters prowling the halls. With them, they had their night vision cameras, and they were narrating every creak and draft like it was the apocalypse. Fast forward to 2021, and word got around that the hotel had fallen into financial limbo. Partial administration, staff thinning out, you know the drill. For big hotels, it usually means bargain rates, so like a complete genius, I booked their largest suite, the Grand Bridal Suite, on Halloween night. My wife, bless her, was just as reckless as I was. To set the scene, apart from us, the only souls in the building that night were a pack of ghost hunters somewhere in the opposite wing. No staff, no other guests, just us and an entire creaky mansion. Perfect. Encounter 1 is the phantom hallway stroll. We're watching some forgettable TV show when I spotted light underneath the door to the hall flick on. These were motion-activated lights, mind you, then clear as day, and a shadow drifted past. That corridor ended in an alarmed fire exit. No rooms. Nowhere for anyone to go. I sat staring at the light like a cat waiting for its prey. But no one came back, and when it finally flicked off, I yanked the door open and boom. The lights are on again, corridor empty. Not even a single draft. Encounter 2. The mischievous bed. Later, we turned in for the night. Being cautious and clumsy, I shoved a chair and my suitcase against the glass double doors inside the suite. Rural Wales is dark, like pitch black, so I didn't fancy accidentally breaking my nose in the glass during a midnight bathroom run. We lay there chatting when the tapping began. Soft, scratchy taps on the 4-poster bed. Cute. I accused my wife and she accused me. Both of us raised hands and feet above the covers and just were trying to prove innocence. I said covers very strangely. The sound stopped, and 10 seconds later it started again, louder this time, and the bed actually shook. And I did the heroic thing, grabbed my phone torch, crawled under, and found nothing. No rodents, no dust, just a spotless underside, which in itself was a bit suspicious. The third encounter is the doors that shouldn't close. Eventually, sleep did claim us, until inevitably I woke at some ungodly hour needing the bathroom. I staggered up, smacked straight into the glass doors, and cursed and reached for the light. My carefully wedged chair and suitcase still in place. But the doors, oh yeah, they'd been firmly closed. And that, my friends, was our Halloween at Miskin Manor. No gray lady, no ghost kids, just flickering lights, a rebellious bed, and doors that had no business moving. Was it paranormal? Who knows? But it was without a doubt a fun night. The Corridor of False Awakenings. I keep slipping into dreams where I suddenly realize, oh, this is a dream. But instead of waking up, I get trapped inside it, fully aware and yet powerless. It's like lucid dreaming's sinister cousin, crystal clear but suffocatingly unpleasant. Most often, I find myself lying in my bed. I'm in the dream trying to sleep. Then the thought strikes. Wait, this isn't real. I try to force myself awake, but instead I wake up back in the same bed in the same dream. My eyes are open and relief washes in, and then dread follows. Still dreaming. It can happen 15, 20 times like a loop tightening around me. Every time the room looks the same, but with tiny little distortions like a frozen clock and the door being slightly wrong, the light flickering where it shouldn't. Over time, I've developed little quote-unquote reality checks. I'll stare at the wall and notice it pixelate like a broken screen, or maybe blur as though my vision had been painted with water. That's when I know I'm still dreaming. I try to wrench my eyes open, but they feel clamped shut, pressure crushing them. My whole body pinned as though a giant hand is pressing me into the mattress. The only lifeline I've found is touch. If I manage to feel my hands or brush against something solid like the phone or my nightstand or something, I sometimes anchor myself back to consciousness, but not always. The most desperate time, I remember climbing out of a dream bed and staggering to the wall and slamming my forehead against it again and again until the world cracked and I jolted awake. I knew it wasn't real, but it was the only exit that worked. It used to happen once or twice a year. Now it comes every couple of months, growing stronger and darker. And I've noticed, the less I sleep, the worse it gets. On nights after only 3 or 4 hours, the loop tightens, and the strangest part is if I fall asleep on my side, I feel invisible hands tugging at my shoulders and pressing me down and pulling me away. I dread sleep now. Not because of nightmares, but because I might wake up in my bed again and again, never certain if I've really woken up. The House That Breathed. I was 15 years old when it all began. I was in a quiet suburb in Quebec, and ours was a blended family. Stitched together with love and friction, and the real trouble started, though, when my father and stepmother bought a new house. An old place with too much history in its walls. I'd never believed in ghosts and never cared for the idea that spirits are wandering around, but after what happened there, I couldn't shrug it off anymore. The first incident came just before New Year's. We had set up a little carousel decoration that spun slowly when plugged in, and one night, long after we'd gone to bed, the carousel started turning on its own, faster than I'd ever seen it spin. We pulled the plug, but it kept going for a full minute before stopping dead still. The second event was stranger. My bedroom was on the top floor, with the window looking out over the street. One night after returning from the bathroom, I heard 3 sharp knocks against the glass. My room was 3 stories up. No balcony, no tree branches. Nothing that could reach it. I held my breath, pulled the curtain back. I found only an empty street glowing under a single lamppost. The last time I was alone in the garage, I was digging through boxes. I just crouched down when I felt a warm breath brush against the back of my neck, slow and deliberately. I spun around so fast I knocked over a crate of tools, but of course there was nothing. Just me in the shadows. You could say it was my imagination, but the day after we left that house, the new owners called my father in a panic. Water pipes had burst inside the walls and flooded nearly every room. And this is really the first time I've, spoken or written about it. But I'll say this. Before that house, I didn't believe in ghosts, and now I believe the house believed in me. The Quiet Tenant. Two nights ago, I felt it again. Last night, too, though not nearly as strong. I've never been fully decided about God, the afterlife, or whether the two even belong in the same conversation. We moved into this house back in 2020, right before the world shut down. Not long after that, we had our first daughter, and she was around a year old when she sat in the living room one afternoon, waving cheerfully toward the staircase. Nobody was there, though. A close friend of mine, one of those people who's always half tuned into the unseen, they came by shortly after we'd settled in. At one point in the middle of some football game, he went pale and lost track of whatever he was saying. When asked if he was okay, he brushed it off, and I let it go, but it did stick with me. Time passed. My daughter grew and learned to talk, and age 3, she would sometimes call hello into an empty hallway. At 4, she told me about the shadow man in the house. Not bad, she insisted, just different. A quiet shadow that sometimes wanted to talk. I ignored it for a while. I tried to. But then the cold spots started, especially in the laundry room in the basement. If I stepped too far in, the hair on my arms bristled and my skin tightened. The air felt electric. Finally, one night, I stood there and I said out loud, "We bought this house. It's ours now. Leave us be." And for months afterward, the feeling was gone. But it comes back every so often. Whenever it does, I repeat the same thing firmly. House goes quiet again. For a while. Lately, though, it's even more active. And even now as I write, I can sense it nearby. I asked my neighbor once about the family who lived here before us. I assumed maybe somebody had died in the house. He told me no, the father had left years earlier, and as far as anyone knows, is still alive. So much for that theory. Last night was the strongest it's ever been. I was up late, beer in hand, and every trip downstairs to grab another felt like walking into someone else's breath. I spoke to it then, calmly but firmly. Stay out of my kids' rooms. Stay away from my wife. And 6 weeks ago, I'd even gone so far as to offer help. And I told it that if there was a way I could ease it out, to give me a sign. The very next night, the cord above my fridge had jolted against a storage bin with a sharp bang. No breeze, no vibration, just movement. But last night was different. I was in the upstairs bathroom, the door was half open. So when I caught something in the mirror, it was a pale, smoky shape, and it slid briskly past the hallway. Not quite walking, more like drifting. Had the outline of a person, but no real form, and it moved toward the garage, and then it was gone. Even our dog reacts sometimes, bolting up the stairs and claws scrambling on the turns, racing toward the bedroom to hide underneath the bed. We always laughed at her nerves, and now I wonder. I worry I've encouraged it by speaking to it. I don't want this in our lives, but moving isn't an option. To be fair, it hasn't harmed us. My friend, the one who notices things, they insist it's harmless and playful even. I can't help wondering how long can a guest linger before it stops being polite. The last visit. When I was born, my mom was already fighting her demons. Drugs, bad choices, the kind of things kids only learn about later. And by the time I was 5, I'm living with my grandparents full time. One sticky July night, I woke up suddenly. The air felt heavy, like the room was holding its breath. And at the foot of my bed stood a woman I didn't recognize. She didn't speak, she didn't move, she just stood there, her outline soft in the moonlight. I froze and I was staring. After a moment that felt like forever, she faded into nothing. I lay awake till sunrise, too terrified to close my eyes again. That morning, Grandma called me and my sisters into the living room. I figured it was about chores or pulling weeds or folding laundry. Instead, Grandma's face was pale and tight with fear. She said quietly, "Your mommy was hurt last night by a very bad man." My sister burst into tears and bolted to her room. I didn't cry. I didn't even understand. And at 6 years old, the words didn't fit together in my head right. A few days later, Grandpa sat me down and asked if I remembered my mom, and I told him no, Then he pulled out his old flip phone and showed me a picture. Him, Grandma, Dad, and a young woman with tired eyes and a crooked smile. My stomach dropped because it was her, the woman from my bedroom. I didn't say anything then, not until I was 17, talking to Grandpa about ghosts. Now, Grandpa's not a man who buys into the supernatural, but he said something I never forgot. When someone passes, sometimes they stop by before they move on. We both agreed Mom had come to see me one last time. I'm 20 now, turning 21 this November, and she's never really left my mind. The only other time I felt her was when I was 19. I'd been thinking about her, whispering to her in my head. And then 3 knocks on my bedroom door, sharp and deliberate. I opened it. The hall was empty. Neither Grandma nor my sister had heard a thing. I took it as her way of answering back, letting me know she was listening. I'd like to think she checks in on me, quietly, making sure I'm okay. The warnings of my father. My dad passed away nearly 8 years ago. He and I were inseparable, like 2 puzzle pieces that happened to fit just right. We had the same humor, same stubborn streak, and same habit of putting hot sauce on literally everything. But one thing did split us right down the middle. He was a firm believer in ghosts and aliens and Bigfoot and all the late-night conspiracy chatter. I was the ultimate skeptic. I didn't buy into any of it. Not until he came back to shake me awake. It had been close to a year since his funeral, and sometimes he slipped into my dreams, but it was always blurry, like static on an old TV. I'd wake up heavy-hearted and unable to recall what he'd said. But this time, it wasn't like that, really. I opened my eyes, and there he was, my dad standing right by my bedroom. In a house he'd never once set foot in. He was tugging me out of sleep, frantic, almost panicked. While I lay beside my sound-asleep wife, "You better go see your grandmother. She won't last through summer." And he said it so matter-of-factly, as if my being half-naked and confused didn't matter at all. My grandmother and I hadn't spoken in years. Family drama had pulled us apart. Money and the usual poisons. Dad used to beg me to visit her to patch things up. But when he saw me building a happy life without that mess, he just let it be. Still, I did miss her sometimes, though I had long accepted the silence between us. At the time, summer was months away. Grandma was frail, yeah, but she was still gardening and gossiping on the phone and baking pies for her neighbors. The cancer that she had was creeping and not racing. I chalked the dream up to guilt and I tried to shake it off. Fast forward, and June arrives, and I finally show up after years of skipped holidays. She's thrilled to see me, and she's thin but lively and cracking jokes and even bragging about her doctor's latest praise. Everything felt fine. And then just 2 weeks later, her health collapsed like a house of cards. And by July, she was in hospice. And by August, she was gone. The speed of it shocked her doctors, and yeah, her death came almost exactly a year to the day after Dad's, just as he had warned me. Years later, it happened again, just setting my phone on silent before bed. Always a small battle for me. When Dad was dying in the ICU, I had my phone muted, and I missed the calls, and I still wrestle with that. That night, I told myself to stop being irrational. Everyone was safe and everything was fine. But in my dream, Dad came again, and this time more urgently. His hands gripping my shoulders and his voice sharp. "Wake up," he kept saying. I bolted upright and I was sweating. My heart was racing. A few minutes later, my husband walked into the room from down the hall, and he'd been sleeping in the guest room. His face was pale, and he told me my cousin had just died. Out of nowhere, young, healthy, and athletic, gone. The dream rushed back to me like a flood. Dad hadn't gotten the chance to tell me, but somehow he tried. Since his passing, I've dreamed of him countless times. Most of the time, he's calm and smiling, cracking jokes in some strange dream world landscape. But only twice has he come to me in my real home, a place he never visited while alive. Both times he's been desperate and distraught and shaking me awake. Both times someone I loved was about to die. I never believed in ghosts and still don't know if I do, but I do believe in my dad. The door that kicked back. In the fall of 2022, I signed up for a ghost tour in downtown Austin, Texas. Now, I don't usually buy into paranormal stuff, but that night ended up giving me the one and only ghostly encounter I've ever had. Our guide stopped us in front of this withered old structure, halfway between a boarding house and office building. It had a big bay window that leaned over the street like it was eavesdropping. He said that it had been standing since the late 1800s, maybe early 1900s, I can't remember exactly. According to him, the building used to be the workplace of a doctor, though doctor might have been too generous, at least back then. He claimed crude surgeries were performed there, and many patients never made it off the table. Supposedly, their restless spirits lingered in those rooms. The group shuffled on toward the next stop, but I hung back. Something about the place pulled at me. I crept up to the front door, thinking I'd just peek through the glass. The second I stepped in front of it, a violent thud rattled the wood. Not a polite knock. No, it sounded like someone was kicking the door from the inside. My body reacted before my brain did. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, staring at the dark interior. In that split second, I caught only a glimpse. A table to the right stacked with loose papers. No lamps, no people. Nothing that could have made that noise. Later, at the end of the tour, I bought the guide's book on Austin hauntings. Half for curiosity, half for validation. I wanted answers. When I got home, I dove into research mode. I dug up city records and ownership histories and even obituaries. I wanted names, dates, and causes of death. Anything to explain what I'd heard. I even drafted an email to the tour guide, though I don't remember if I ever sent it. But the strangest part is the building had no record of deaths, no surgeries, no physicians, not even a mention in the guide's own book. It was as if the story he had told had been stitched together, just out of thin air. And yet, I know what I heard, the slam of a foot against the inside of that door. The kind of sound that bypasses logic and brands itself into your memory. So to this day, I have no explanation. Just a memory of an old house in Austin that kicked back when I tried to get too close. The gray shape behind the Wendy house. For context, I was about 7. My little brother was around 5. This took place at a family gathering in the countryside pub. Maybe 15 people there in total. It's been nearly a decade since, so my memory might have gaps, but what I'm about to tell you really did happen. As far as my terrified younger self can recall. It was late summer of 2015, just after one of my cousins had a small wedding. A few nights later, Mom's side of the family gathered for dinner at a pub not far from our village. Dad wasn't there, they'd split up by then, so it was just me, my brother, and Mom. We ended up seated near a back door that led to a quiet outdoor area. Naturally, being kids, we got restless. Mom let us slip out through that back door to play, while the adults carried on with drinks and chatter. The yard itself was modest, a worn slide, a squeaky swing set, and a crooked set of monkey bars. It was tucked away in a corner. Something far more enticing, though. There was a faded red Wendy house. And that's when it all went wrong. My brother dashed toward the little playhouse, laughing. But the moment he got close, maybe a meter or so away, something impossible appeared. A thick gray mist swirled into shape directly behind him. It towered over us, 7 feet tall at least and vaguely human in outline. And his proportions were odd, almost like a heavy-set man with slumped shoulders. As I was freezing, in the blink of an eye, it dissolved, vanishing without a sound. I screamed for him to run, and he looked startled, but followed me as we bolted back into the pub with my heart hammering in me. Mom asked what on earth had happened. But when I shakily blurted out the story, no one seemed to believe me. My brother swore he hadn't seen anything. The adults laughed it off, saying I had an overactive imagination. Eventually, they just told me to stop carrying on. But the thing is I know what I saw. I was 7, yeah, but the memory's still sharp. The hulking gray figure that stood just long enough to scare me senseless, then disappeared into thin air. I'm 16 now, and though most of that night is a blur, the image of that misty apparition still lingers, etched in my mind as clearly as if it happened yesterday. The Velvet Hills of Brecon. A week ago, I slipped away to Wales for a short holiday. Ghosts are rumored to wander those valleys in droves, though none cared to cross my path. Instead, I found myself lodged into a farmhouse older than memory, tucked at the edge of a wood with hills unfurling in every direction like green waves. Our host had just given us an entire wing, its thick stone walls and creaking staircases clearly accustomed to centuries of footsteps. The opposite side was still lived in by the owners, who greeted us warmly. We arrived late in the evening after a long, weary drive. The farmhouse radiated welcome, yeah, but also something else, like an indefinable fullness, as if time itself had never stopped living there. The old furniture seemed carved into place rather than arranged, heavy with performance. Our bedroom was upstairs and comfortable, almost too comfortable. Yet the sensation of not being alone thickened as we settled in. I drifted into sleep quickly, only to plunge into a dream so vivid that even now it clings like cobweb. In the dream, I was still in that same room. The chest of drawers stood before me, but instead of the lamp and postcards I remembered, it bore a strange construction, a diorama of rolling hills, sculpted not from paper or clay, but from something far darker. At first it seemed to be velvet fabric shaped into ridges, but then I noticed wedges into these folds and bits of animals. Not cats, but foxes. Tiny severed paws poked from the ridges, a russet tail coiled like a road, a small skull half buried in a velvet slope. I recoiled with my heart pounding, turned to wake my partner. When I looked back, the gruesome fragments had vanished. The velvet remained, innocent as if nothing had ever been there. Somehow worse. I felt an oppressive certainty that the house was aware of us, that we had to leave, but without letting it know our intent. So I spoke cheerfully to my partner, making secret gestures trying to signal urgency. I remember us slipping out and pushing the car silently down the lane so the engine wouldn't betray us. Then there was chaos. The owners appeared from nowhere, losing arrows at us with medieval bows, as if defending their land from intruders. That was when I jolted awake, clammy and shaking. My partner stirred too. He confessed to have his own unsettling visions. Footsteps on the hall carpet, and the silhouette of the owner pausing at her doorway, peering in as though checking on sleeping guests, or inspecting captives. And I am by nature pretty rational. I mean, dreams are dreams, and coincidences are coincidences, and yet this house was only one among the 10 we stayed in where I felt that crawling unease. Oddly enough, my memory of it isn't purely bad. The place was heartbreakingly beautiful, but I know I wouldn't spend a second night there. And as if the farmhouse wanted to give us one last reminder, the next morning, not long after we left, we nearly collided with another car on a narrow road. It shook us badly enough that I marked the exact spot on Google Maps. A pin in the digital world to remind me. Wales is lovely, but some places watch you back. The House of Shadows. I didn't even know places like this subreddit existed until recently. I would have thrown this story out here a long time ago. I'm a 22-year-old Canadian guy, small town kid. When I was 6, I broke my arm pretty badly. Clean snap. After the cast came off, I was stuck in bed for a few weeks recovering. I remember lying there one night while my mom, my sister, and 2 of my mom's friends were laughing quietly in the living room. They were happy I'd healed fine, but at first the doctors weren't sure I'd regained full movement. But that night, something else happened. At first, it was normal. Just me in my room half asleep. And then these figures started to appear near my closet. Shadowy, tall, and thin, almost sliding across the walls. They circled me slowly, one by one, getting closer. 6-year-old me screamed bloody murder. My mom came running, flipped the light on, and told me it was just shadows from the hallway. Only they weren't anywhere near the door, and it didn't matter, though. She comforted me and turned the light off and left. Within minutes, they were back, and I cried myself to sleep. Fast forward a couple years later. I quote-unquote woke up one night. I walked around the house. I saw my mom typing away at the old family computer. I even saw her walk to both my room and my older brother's. In the morning, I told her about it. And years later, when I brought it up again, she swore she'd checked on both me and my brother, and we were sound asleep in bed that night. Creepy enough, right? Well, it got worse. When I was about 9, my brother and I switched bedrooms. Mom thought maybe a new space would get me to stop talking about the shadow people. First few nights were fine, and then I saw him, the tallest shadow I'd ever seen. He filled the doorway, then stepped closer and closer until he towered over me. I felt this weird sensation wash through me, like heat rolling from my toes up to my head, leaving goosebumps and other feelings I couldn't explain at that age. Not pain, not fear, something else. It was intense, and it was too intense. A few days later, my head started jerking back and forth without me controlling it. My eyes twitched and my shoulders jerked, and I was eventually diagnosed with Tourette's. Doctors didn't find anything unusual, just a standard neurological explanation. And I never shook the thought that it all started with that shadow figure. Even when we moved to the city later, the shadows seemed to follow. Sometimes just flickers in the corner of my eye, other times full silhouettes. One night back in my hometown again, I noticed a glowing dot on the ceiling above my bed. At first, I thought it was a reflection, but when I moved toward it, it floated away, and when I got back in bed, it drifted back over me. And years later, I'm walking my dog, and I saw it look like a star crossing the sky. Too slow to be a shooting star, too. I think it was too steady to be a plane. Then it just stopped and paused and shot off in a completely different direction at an insane speed. And even now, I still see them. Figures and shadows and flickers. They're in the daylight, in corners of houses, and in reflections. Hopefully you can't hear this cow screaming at me outside. Later, I found out my mom's house had black mold in the basement. Makes you wonder. My younger brother, who ended up in his old room, started saying he saw things weirdly, like objects changing size and distances shifting. So yeah, to this day, I don't even know if it was mold or sleep paralysis or something else that decided to stick with me all these years. But I've never truly been alone in a room. The red signal on the island. Picture this. I'm a working magician, the kind who occasionally dabbles in summoning the less polite residents of the astral plane. Nothing unusual for me. I've grown up with this sort of thing. Ghosts, whispers, flickers of shadows. Been there, done that. I usually treat it like background noise, but one night something carved fear into me so deep I still can't shake it. I live near a massive forest reserve, the kind that saw brutal fighting in World War II. Beautiful shore, but also damp, swampy, and heavy with old echoes. I've seen wraiths and odd shapes wandering there before. It's like a personal playground. The day before my ritual, I went scouting for a spot. It was deep in the reserve. I stumbled on a stone bridge, arched and elegant, leading to a little island. There was a meadow stretched across it, with cattle lazily grazing underneath the sun. Perfect, I thought. Marked it, went home. At 3:15 a.m., full moon in Scorpio, I headed back, and the air felt wrong and electrified, and birds shrieked like they'd seen a predator, and their chaos gnawing at my nerves. A gut voice whispered, turn back, turn back. But if you've done this sort of work, you know sometimes the veil pushes back, and I ignored it. The closer I got to the bridge, the quieter it became. Then total silence. No birds, nothing. And my eyesight is terrible, -4. So the world ahead was mostly a blur of blacks. There was a sharp, pulsing red dot, and it was dead ahead, exactly where I planned to stand. I didn't hesitate, I just kept walking until the dot grew and it was flashing. Then it erupted into a column of fire. Not sideways like a flamethrower, straight up vertically. Somewhere in the hiss, I swear I caught muffled voices. I froze and the thing blinked, and a second flare burst to life on the far side of the island. My curiosity outweighed my caution, at least for a step. But as soon as I moved, there goes my phone. Maybe I got a jump scare out of somebody. As soon as I moved, the flames died, and the red light quickened like a heartbeat racing. And that's when something ancient and primal hit me. It was like a program hardwired into my bones switched on, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was prey. I've had knives pulled on me before. I've stared into the wrong end of a pistol. But the terror I felt there made all of that feel like child's play. It was hopeless fear, a crushing certainty that if I took another step, I wouldn't come back. So I turned, slow and deliberately, like a man trying not to startle a beast. I didn't run, I just couldn't, and I just walked and every nerve was screaming. Once I reached the road, I tried calling friends, desperate for a human voice. And every call went straight to voicemail. Even my insomniac friend who never turns off his ringer. Later, he swore his phone was on, and he only got the missed call notification 2 hours later at 5 a.m. when he called back instantly. And as if that wasn't enough, when I finally stepped out of the reserve, a sleek black car pulled across the bridge, then it idled by the roadside. I passed it, but minutes later, the same car crawled past me again at the T-crossing near my house, slowing as if to watch me before speeding away. The next morning, morbid curiosity dragged me back. The cows I'd seen were gone. Haven't spotted them since. In the field were like faint paths pressed into the grass. Not footprints, more like trails of something circling and weaving and converging. All of them led to an oval patch of ground where the grass grew shorter than the rest. But strangely, the flowers in it were untouched. So now I'm left with questions. Did I stumble into someone else's ritual like a military experiment? A UFO landing? Why was I lured there, and why did that fear feel programmed, not natural? Should I return at the next full moon, or would that be suicide? I want to know. God help me, I want to know. The Stomping Hour. Here's the thing. I think my friend who passed away last month at just 23 might be haunting our apartment. Yeah, I know how that sounds, but let me start from the beginning. Back on June 12th, I texted him asking if he wanted to hop on Discord so we could hang out like usual. He replied just after midnight on the 13th, saying he'd probably be online the next day. And that was the last message I ever got from him. By the 15th, I had this horrible gut feeling, like a wave of panic out of nowhere. I knew something was wrong. On the 16th, we reached out to his mom, and she hadn't heard from him either. The next morning, firefighters and police forced their way into his apartment, and there he was. They said it was most likely complications from his diabetes, maybe mixed with the meds he'd been on. Nothing strange happened immediately after, aside from a few odd coincidences, the kind of stuff you brush off. But then things shifted. The day before the funeral, we stopped by his apartment peeking through the windows. His family wanted nothing to do with the place. Too many debts, too many reminders. But we wanted something or anything to remember him by. He used to write poems, and we hoped to find his old notebook. Maybe even get one of his line tattoos. Or rather, get one of his lines tattooed. And that's when the weirdness started. On July 13th, exactly a month after his final message, we were lying in bed around 2 a.m. That's when we heard stomping in the empty unit next door. It was heavy and deliberate. They were pacing back and forth. Went on for nearly an hour. We didn't dare check. And after that night, I stopped laying tarot cards and the noise stopped too. But a few days ago, I made the mistake of pulling a spread for him, asking how he was doing on the other side. That same night around 1 a.m., the footsteps came back. This time it was louder, like somebody walking straight from the living room into a hallway. A friend came over with the Bible at 2 a.m. The moment he stepped into the living room, the lamp on the wall flickered, just once. Then the stomping stopped. So now I'm stuck wondering, did the tarot card somehow anchor him here, and did I accidentally invite him in? We were the last people he talked to. Maybe even the last ones who mattered. Maybe he's clinging to that. I'm planning to burn the cards and cleanse the place with sage, but honestly, I'm not sure it'll be enough. All I know is that every time midnight creeps closer, I start bracing for that sound again. The stomping hour. The thing by the stop sign. This memory's lingered in the back of my mind for years, like an itch I can't scratch. The event took place in 2016 when I was a junior in high school, crashing with a few friends at another buddy's house for the weekend. To this day, I still can't explain this, but maybe somebody out there can. That night, one friend and I slipped outside around 12:45 a.m. for a smoke. The air was cool and quiet and perfect for wandering. We set off down the road without a plan. The sky was unusually dark, and the moon smothered behind heavy clouds, and no street lamps to guide us, just the faint glow of distant houses. Still, we walked without trouble, laughing here and there until the laughter stopped. We reached the end of a long stretch of pavement, maybe a quarter mile from the house. As we slowed to take a right turn that would loop us back, our eyes caught the stop sign at the corner. And that's when we froze. Next to the sign stood a figure. Not a shadow, not a trick of the light. A solid black mass shaped like a person, but stretched too tall. At least 7.5 feet tall. And its outline was sharp and was dark. We both went silent and locked into place staring. No words, no plan, just raw instincts. And those instincts were to run. We bolted, tearing back down the street until the familiar lawn of the house came into view. And when we reached the yard, we finally gasped out our fear. My friend only nodded when I asked if he saw it too, and his face was pale and his lips were tight. That unspoken confirmation was worse than denial. We slipped inside and tried to calm down while the rest of the group slept. The next morning, when we finally confessed the encounter, the friend who owned the house immediately shut us down. He said he didn't want to hear about it. His room had already been plagued by strange events and objects moving and lights flickering, voices when no one else was around. Most of our group had seen at least one odd thing while staying over, and suddenly his reaction made sense. Years later, my friend and I still bring it up, usually late at night when the silence feels too heavy. We always land in the same place and there's no neat explanation. Weed doesn't make you hallucinate in perfect synchronicity. Street shadows don't stand tall and still like a person. Whatever it was, we both saw it, and the dread that washed over us that night is something I'll never forget. The Pale Man in the Trailer. This has haunted me for years. Still don't know how to explain it. 2013, 2016. Lived in a little nowhere town in Kansas. Our property has an old single-wide trailer. Once belonged to my grandparents. By the time I was growing up, it was collapsing in on itself. It was only used for junk storage. The roof was sagging, windows broken, and vines crawling up the sides. One summer afternoon, I'm out mowing with my brother, and we're heading back when, for no real reason, I glanced through the busted window of what used to be the master bedroom. There it was, a tall, bone-pale figure with arms too long standing in the dim corner. It didn't move toward me, it just raised a hand, slow and deliberate, and waved. I froze and turned to my brother and said, "You see that?" And he looked once and bolted. And of course I ran too, nearly face-planting when I caught my foot on a half-buried fence post. But the thing is we both saw it. A year later, out of nowhere, I asked him, "Do you remember what was in that trailer window?" He described it the same way I remembered, pale and silent and watching. And here's where it gets stranger. My very first memory, the one I've carried since before I could even talk, was of being in a shed, and it was spotless and freshly built with the sun spilling in through the cracks. The man I didn't know was kneeling and speaking softly to me. My brother was there too, fastening something like a bracelet or a chain around my wrist. Then the man walked into the back room, and the memory ends. Years later, I found out that shed was real, my grandfather's workshop, right there on the same property. I'd never been inside of it as a kid and never seen photos, but my memory kind of matched its layout exactly, down to the shelves when they were new. When I finally told my dad about the memory, he went pale, asked me to describe the man. I said, tall, short, dark hair, serious but kind. My dad pulled out an old black and white photo. It was my grandfather. He had died years before I was born. I'd never seen his face, but I recognized it instantly. So now I'm left with this, a memory from before memory should even exist, standing face to face with somebody who shouldn't have been there. A strange gift, a chain clasped on me by my brother. And years later, the pale figure waving from the ruin of the trailer my grandparents once called home. Whatever that was, it hasn't let me go. The Black Mass of Mercy General. Roughly a decade ago, I worked security at Mercy General Hospital in Pittsburgh. It's in Pennsylvania. And it was anything but a dull gig. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., which meant endless patrols through both the newer facilities and the classic wing, as we called it. A hulking structure from the 30s. It had been converted mostly into office space. The liveliest spot was a unit on the 5th floor of the new wing. Memory's fuzzy, but I believe it belonged to the nuclear medicine or possibly hypertension. One of those departments where machines beeped constantly and half the rooms looked like sets kind of borrowed from like some old sci-fi show. The place honestly reminded me of the control lab from the Incredible Hulk series where Bruce Banner got blasted by gamma rays. This unit had 3 sections divided by thick walls. Staff swore the place was haunted by a doctor's restless spirit, which appeared not as a figure but as a shifting black mass. According to the housekeeping crew, the thing that followed was like a routine. It would emerge in the left section, slide straight through the wall, and vanish into the far right wing. The text confirmed it, but refused to discuss it for too long. Most wouldn't even enter the unit without every fluorescent light blazing. One night, curiosity got the better of me. While making rounds, I actually witnessed it. An inky shape crawling out of the wall like smoke and slipping into the section that was never left dark. I kept my distance. No way was I chasing a ghost through drywall. But to this day, it ranks as the strangest sight of my life. What I dreaded the most, though, was patrolling the old wing. Since it was mostly offices, I had to jiggle every doorknob to check locks. The 7th floor, once an old surgical ward, carried an oppressive energy. Never saw a figure there, but I did catch doors easing open and slamming shut with no one around. Subtle stuff, but it piled up. There were also the belongings runs whenever a patient passed, security collected and inventoried their items. Then got a nurse's signature, and more than once after the body had been wheeled to the morgue, I overheard nurses whispering about voices still coming from the deceased rooms. But as soon as I walked in, the conversation would die instantly. Strangely enough, the morgue itself was uneventful for me. It was located in the basement, rumored to be a hotspot. We checked in bodies, released them to funeral homes, did paperwork. Never had a single eerie moment there. Somehow, it was the living spaces above. The place is still echoing with patients' last words that felt truly haunted. The cat that never left. Back in 2015, I bought my first house. A little 2-bedroom, 1-bath place on the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, but what drew me to it was the fact that everything inside was untouched since it was built in the late 60s. The original owners had lived there their entire lives. The only updates they ever made were repairs when absolutely necessary. It felt like stepping into a time capsule, and I loved the blank slate vibe. On my first walkthrough, one detail caught my eye. The garage wall was covered in faded cat calendars, all pinned side by side like wallpaper. In the living room, there's a light switch plate with a cartoon tabby that looked hand-painted. Clearly, a woman who had lived there adored cats. And as a lifelong cat person myself, 2 at the time, now 5, I couldn't help but think, okay, this is fate. I learned from the neighbors that the husband had passed away several years before, not in the house though. The widow was moving into assisted living and explained why the place felt so unchanged and frozen in her life's routines. For the next year, I went to town fixing it up and ripped out the shag carpet and rewired the entire place. I put in a ductless unit and redid the kitchen cabinets, even knocked down the wall to make the living room feel bigger. And during that time, I also met my girlfriend, and eventually she moved in. Now here's where it gets strange. Every once in a while, usually when I was in bed alone, I'd feel something jump onto the foot of the mattress. Not hard, just that subtle weight shift, like when a cat hops up. Then slow, deliberate steps back and forth. Never went further than that, never touched me, never made a sound. Just that faint pressure of movement at the end of the bed. First, I chalked it up to my imagination, or maybe my body twitching as I was drifting off. But it kept happening, once every week or two like clockwork. 2 years in, I finally mentioned it to my girlfriend. I expected her to laugh it off. But instead, she froze and gave me that flat look people give you when they realize they're not crazy. Said she'd been feeling the exact same thing, but hadn't wanted to bring it up to me. Weirdest part is it was so consistent, so specific, and yet impossible to explain. I didn't feel threatening, just like a cat who never quite left its old home. We sold the house in 2021, moved halfway across the country. In our new place, not once has it happened again. The house beneath the soil. When I was 10 years old, my parents yanked us out of the only neighborhood I've ever known and dropped us into a small, cliquish town. A town where outsiders were treated like imported weeds. You didn't belong unless you were planted there at birth. At first, life in our shiny new house seemed perfectly fine. My parents were proud, and it was the first home ever built on that plot, though not the first to exist there. Local gossip floated around that decades ago, an unlikable man had lived on the property in a house that he let to rot into the junkyard. Or rather, into a junkyard. The story went that one night somebody finally snapped and set fire to his place. It burned and collapsed and eventually got buried. When we first moved in, the basement really wasn't finished, so my 3 sisters and I were stuffed down there like boxes in a storage unit. There were cement floors with no heat. And while my little brothers enjoyed cozy rooms upstairs, I was there, and after 2 years of complaints, my mother rallied the family. Grandpa wired the lights, my uncle and dad hammered the frame. My mother wrangled drywall until her arms ached. At last, we had real bedrooms, and more importantly, we had heat. But the old house in the backyard wasn't done with us. One summer, a contractor friend of my dad's asked if he could scoop some of our soil. It was unusually rich and dark, and my parents agreed, and he dug deep until a shovel kind of clanged against something solid. With careful scraping, he uncovered a chunk of cement foundation, charred wood beams, and even a few warped utensils that looked like they'd survived a fire. He asked my mom if she wanted him to just keep going, and she shook her head and said, "Just cover it back up." I remember being secretly crushed. I wanted him to keep digging, morbidly curious whether bones might show up. But back under the soil it went. Not long after, the house itself seemed to stir, and doors began slamming. There was never a warning. The basement door especially had a habit of rattling violently. My mother complained first, but I didn't believe her until one night I heard it myself. No one was downstairs, yet the door banged as if an unseen hand had shoved it. And sometimes the television clicked on by itself, glowing in an empty room. By the time I was 16, the unease was constant. I had joined the marching band. I played clarinet, and one night after a late competition, I returned home alone. Everyone was asleep. The air inside was heavy and colder than it should have been. Thought about grabbing a snack, but my nerves told me nah. Crept downstairs, got ready for bed, and dove underneath my blankets like a soldier into a trench. And that's when it began. The front door rattled hard, the knob twisting and shaking. Heavy footsteps thudded across the entryway, forwards and backwards and forwards again. It was paired with the violent tug of the doorknob. It went on, a terrible rhythm. I froze underneath the covers, and I was just praying nothing would descend the stairs toward my room. And then silence. And in the morning I asked my family if anybody had been awake. Every single one of them shook their heads. Nobody had heard a thing. And that's when I realized The house we had buried never really stayed buried. Chains in the night. I grew up in the Dominican Republic. Saying my family has a complicated relationship with the paranormal would be putting it lightly. Take my uncle, for example. He swore on his life that one night he saw a black figure leaning over his wife while she slept. And the next morning, she was gone. No warning, no illness, just a sudden heart attack. When his daughter came to stay with us after the funeral, she shared a room with my great-grandmother. That room used to be my uncle's, right next to the backyard. And let me tell you, that backyard felt like a place where the shadows stayed longer than they should. One night, my cousin dreamed her mother was strangling her. My great-grandmother, who was devoutly Catholic, jolted awake and started shouting. She was shouting at a girl who was still asleep. Everybody else thought it was bizarre, but I couldn't close my eyes again that night. Fast forward, my mom grew up in Barahona, quite a coastal town wrapped in jungles. She used to hear the sound of dragging chains outside her bedroom window as a kid. When she moved to the city, where I was raised, she still heard those same chains, only now scraping outside my uncle's old window. She says they stopped once we all moved to the U.S. Then there was my little sister, between ages of 4 and 6. She'd wander the house at night, sleepwalking. Whenever she'd left our shared room, I could hear the living room furniture shifting around like somebody dragging couches across the tile. Nobody else ever heard it, and they'd say, "You're imagining things." But I'd stake my life on it that I wasn't. And there's more, of course, a lot more. My great-grandmother's house alone could fill a book. But I just wanted to share the small piece because, for whatever reason, everyone in my family has stories like these. And honestly, I don't know what to make of them. The girl in the white dress. Never really shared this before. But it's one of those memories that's branded itself into my brain. I was 15 at the time, and I'm 25 now. My dad lived in what was basically a glorified shed that someone had kind of slapped a kitchen and bathroom into. Cozy, sure, and safe, well, not even a little bit. And I'm still convinced that place was haunted. It started the way bad dreams start. I'd wake up and couldn't move, classic sleep paralysis, or so I thought to myself. But this wasn't normal paralysis. One night I couldn't even open my eyes, and it felt like a grown man sat full weight into my chest, like he's trying to crush the air out of me. And another time I actually saw something. A shadow crouched in the corner of my room, sitting there. I lay frozen for 15 agonizing minutes until I managed to flick on my lamp. And poof, nothing. No pile of clothes, no chair, nothing to mistake for a figure. And then came the noises. Once I woke to the sound of frantic wings, like a bird or a bat circling my room. The flapping was so loud I sat there shaking. But the window was shut tight, and the lock on my door made it impossible for anything to get in. And the part that really got me is it only ever happened in that house. Never at my mom's place, never at my grandparents', never even during sleepovers, just there in my dad's shed at home. For a while, I thought I was losing it, until the night that basically proved I wasn't. My dad and I were sitting in the kitchen with the back door wide open. We're looking out into the dark, and suddenly I saw somebody drift past the doorway. A girl looked about my age, wearing a white dress with hair dark shoulder length. My stomach dropped, and I thought maybe I imagined it until my dad, in the most casual but horrified voice, said, "Did you see that?" chills, absolute chills. I asked him what he saw, and he described the exact same thing. That girl didn't look fully real. Not transparent, but like she was only 90% in this world and the rest somewhere else. Wrong and unnatural. I never saw her again, but after that night I couldn't ignore it. I kept hearing and seeing and feeling things in that bedroom until my dad eventually moved. And honestly, I've been trying to forget her ever since. The Hollow Guest. I know it sounds insane, but I need some answers. My family laughs at me when I bring it up. They say I'm paranoid, maybe even losing it. But something's been wrong ever since we moved into that old mobile home 5 years back. At first, it was little things. Like one night, maybe 3 months in, I jolted awake with my heart pounding like somebody had yanked me out of a nightmare. Except I wasn't dreaming. I felt eyes on me, heavy and sharp. When I turned my head, I saw it. A black shape clinging to the ceiling, hovering right above my son's bed. It wasn't smoke. It wasn't a shadow. It was something solid and hunched there watching. I tried to yell, but my voice wouldn't come. My body was locked in place. Finally, I managed to shove my wife awake, and she stared at me like I was crazy while I pointed at the thing. She saw nothing. Nothing. When I finally croaked out what I saw, she just shook her head and told me to go back to sleep. So I told myself it was just a bad dream, and for a while I believed it. But then the house began to breathe in ways it shouldn't. Footsteps in the hallway when no one was there. Doors clicking open. Voices whispering like they were just out of reach. When our second child was born, all 3 kids shared a room. I gave up my side of the bed to sleep in the spare room. And that's when things escalated. It started small. A tug on my hair at night and the blanket ripped off my body. But then came the dreams. Horror so vivid I'd wake up shaking. Blood pooling in rivers and babies burning and faces twisted into grotesque masks. And always, always screaming my name. This past week has been the worst of my life. I haven't slept for more than an hour at a time, and every time I close my eyes, I'm either dragged into those visions or wake up gasping, unable to move. Some pressure pinning me down. 2 nights ago, I woke to a whisper in my ear. A woman's voice, low and guttural and not human. Last night I opened my eyes and I realized I couldn't move. Only my eyes would dart around the room, and there it was in that doorway. It had a body, or an outline of one. There was no eyes and no face, just this hollowness. Tell me I'm not alone, and tell me this happens to other people. Just tell me I'm not losing my mind. The night the hallway stayed dark. This is one of those stories that sticks with me. Probably because it scared the absolute daylights out of me. I've mentioned before that I've had weird, possibly paranormal stuff happen since I was a kid, and, well, this one is burned into my brain. I was in 3rd grade, living in Suffolk, Virginia. Our house had this motion-detecting nightlight in the hallway. It's super sensitive, like sneeze in its direction, it'll light up. My sister and I could never avoid it since our doors were right next to it, and even going to the bathroom meant crossing its little 5-foot force field. My mom, though, she lucked out. Her bedroom was right by the stairs, just out of its range. At that age, I was terrified of the dark. And embarrassingly, I was also terrified of the Slender Man because it was 2013. Internet was cruel to children. So I'd sleep with my door open, the bathroom light on, and sometimes even my closet light blazing. My mom hated it, and she'd sneak in once I was asleep and switch them off. Partly because the glow drove her nuts, and partly because electricity bills. Anyway, one night I woke up around 3 a.m. My little laptop was next to me, and I'd usually watch Dan TDM or Stampy until I passed out. I remember the screen was dark, and I tapped it awake, and as I'm lying there, my closet light suddenly clicks off, and right after I see this shadow, human-sized, slid across my wall and left my room. The thing is motion nightlight didn't turn on. There was not even a flicker, and that was impossible. We once found a mouse in our house. It was triggered by that light at 2 a.m. Socks and dust and anything set it off. But the shadow was, nope, straight ghost behavior. I freaked out, obviously. I tiptoed into the hallway, which instantly triggered the nightlight. Worked perfectly fine. Found nothing. Checked the stairs, empty, and my sister was fast asleep in her room. I went to my mom's room, and I was hoping it'd been her, but she was dead asleep, and when I shook her awake and blurted out what I saw, she sat up instantly. She was panicked and searched the whole house with the doors locked and windows shut. Nobody there. She wasn't pranking me. My mom believed in paranormal stuff too, after all. But she was also in full what if an intruder got in mode. And to this day, I cannot explain how that shadow managed to walk out of my room without setting off the world's touchiest nightlight. So yeah, either I'm a very imaginative 8-year-old at the time, or I really did have a ghost stroll out of my closet that night. Dan TDM or Stampy. God, I feel old. Ren and Stimpy. The thing on the roof. I think it was 7th grade. Somewhere maybe around 12, and honestly, feels like another lifetime. My parents were divorced, and that weekend I was at my dad's place in Ohio. He lived in this split-level house with a big deck in the back, looked out onto a stretch of dark woods. Bedrooms lined the top floor, and mine was across from his, and little guest rooms sat at the very end of the hall. That night, my dad and baby brother crashed early, and I was still awake, sprawled out in my bed, watching late-night cartoons with the volume turned low. It's probably around midnight, maybe later. I remember lying on my side, half asleep, when I heard it. A heavy thud on the roof. At first, I thought it was a branch falling. Or a raccoon. Raccoons are popular. But then, I kid you not, I heard footsteps. They were deliberate and right above me, the sound of something pacing, and my stomach tightened. Before I could even sit up, the entire house went dark. The TV cut off, the hallway nightlight blinked out, even the little hum of the fridge downstairs died. And that's when fear hit me like a punch in the chest. I couldn't move, and not even a twitch. I just froze there under the blanket. My body was locked up. Then came the sound from the guest room at the end of the hall, like something shifting around in there. I was sure somebody had broken in. My heart was hammering. Braced myself to hear footsteps in the hallway, but what I saw instead is burned into my memory. Stepped out of the guest room, and it wasn't human. It was like 6 feet tall, and its whole form was glowing faintly, like mist-giving shapes. Human shapes, but wrong. And this movement didn't flow right, like its joints bent where they shouldn't be. It bolted down the hall toward the stairs, too fast. The sound it made on the hardwood wasn't like shoes, and not like bare feet, more like claws tapping wood. I wanted to scream for my dad, but nothing came out. My throat was locked tight. I just lay there paralyzed, listening as it tore down the steps and vanished. For minutes I heard nothing, just the silence of a house that should have felt safe. And then, as suddenly as it had gone out, the power flicked back on. The digital clock beside my bed flashed like it had been reset. I stayed up the rest of the night glued to the TV, trying to pretend it hadn't happened. Never told my dad. He wasn't the kind of guy who'd believe me anyway.
Embark on a journey of the unexplained with Paranormal M. Our channel is dedicated to unraveling the mysteries that surround us. Subscribe and tap the notification bell to be part of our growing community and discover the hidden truths of the paranormal. When I was younger, I lived in a fraternity house that everyone accepted as being haunted due to a lot of weird occurrences that, as the story goes, all started when one of the members OD'd on coke in the late 70s and early 80s. There was even a plaque for him on the first floor. Everyone ended up having their own stories of what happened to them. Usually small stuff that wasn't really malicious in any way, just more of a, hey, look at me type of thing. But the weirdest by far was that every single person that slept in the same room that guy allegedly died in very quickly developed sleep paralysis and would wake up feeling like someone was pinning them down to the bed. I had a few very minor experiences, like things moving or paper towel dispensers going off on their own, but the most concrete for me was when I was walking down to the basement one day in the summer, when hardly anyone was in the house. As I was going down the stairs, I saw the shadow of a figure move into the boiler room and the door swung behind it. I thought it was a bit odd, mainly because I was one of the only people there at the time, and the light in the boiler room was turned off. So I was a bit confused as to how a shadow could have been projected. I went into the boiler room and flipped on the lights, but there was nothing there. I searched that room top to bottom and couldn't find any evidence that someone was in there. I never used to believe in ghosts. I would joke around with friends and tell spooky stories to get them riled up, but never a believer. I became a care worker. I would work night shifts and sleepover shifts, where you're supposed to sleep. And that's where it all changed. One night in a 2-story home for 6 older adults, I heard footsteps downstairs while I was upstairs in the staff bed, attempting to sleep. I heard attempts at opening the kitchen doorknob ever so slightly, the old metal screeching. We locked the doors so as to prevent the dementia resident from accessing the kitchen at night for safety reasons. I'm thinking it's her, confused, wandering downstairs. I get out of bed, head to the stairwell, and look down toward the kitchen door. I don't see anyone. I think possibly she's trying to get back to her room. So I head down and go towards the back of the house. Nothing. No one. I peek into each resident's room. All sound asleep. The residents didn't move very fast due to age, so it would be difficult for them to make it to their room before I would see them. I head back to my room upstairs, confused about the situation. Placed it down to being an older house making noises. I get back upstairs, laid into bed, and rested my head on the pillow. All of a sudden, I hear thunderous sprinting up and down the hallway. It sounded heavy and angry. It ran up the hallway and back down. Then silence. I was so terrified I laid silent in bed and cried. I was not the only staff who experienced incidents in that house. Same job, different house. I worked with kids, night shift. I'm at the kitchen table killing some time when I hear a toy go off in the playroom. I think nothing of it. It'll turn off eventually. It keeps going and going. The house is silent, but for this toy. I walk towards the playroom. Right as I reach the door handle, the noise stops, cuts off abruptly. Silence. Weird coincidence, I think nothing more, and I go back to the kitchen. My butts touch the chair for less than a second and the toy begins again. I again think it will shut off itself, but it persists. I go to the door, it stops. It's just a fluke, I tell myself. This stupid toy duck with its stupid quacks wouldn't scare me. I'm an adult. I confidently walk back into the kitchen amidst the silence and go to sit. The quacking resumes. Okay, enough of this. In a confident anger at the toy, I embraced the playroom with no fear, rummaging for the duck toy that was causing so much annoyance. Alas, I found him. Turned him to see where his on and off switch was located. As I rotate the duck, I notice underneath the battery compartment. There are no batteries in this duck. He shouldn't even be working. Commence freakout. Tossed duck into the corner, pulled door closed and locked it. Vowed to not go in the rest of the night. There were no more duck sounds. That house also had other stories. I have two incidents that both took place in my boyfriend's parents' house. When we started dating, he still lived with his parents, since we were just out of high school. The first incident took place when I accidentally fell asleep in his bed one night. I woke up at 3 a.m. and decided to walk home. At this point, it was me, him, his sister, and parents at home. All the bedrooms on one side of the house, and the kitchen/office in across the hallway. So I'm at the door trying to find my coat when I hear something rustle in the kitchen. It sounded like someone threw some cutlery on the floor. I assumed it was his father coming from his office and peeked into the kitchen. No one was there, and the office was dark. So his father wasn't there. I got kinda spooked but continued to put on my jacket. Before I got the chance to put on my shoes, it sounded like someone threw some plates at the ground. I literally heard them shatter. The only thing that went through my mind was, nope, and I ran home without shoes. I talked to my boyfriend's mom about it a few weeks later, and nothing had been out of place or broken. The second incident took place a few months after. Everyone in the house, same people as the last story, including his sister's boyfriend, was asleep. When me and my boyfriend woke up hearing the big mirror in the hallway fall and shatter. It was really loud, so we got worried and opened our door to go see the damage. Well, we found no damage at all. The mirror was intact, still on the wall. The only thing in the hallway was everyone else from the house looking perplexed. They had also heard it. We never figured out what it was that made that sound. It wasn't something happening outside, since no neighbors had heard anything at all. It still creeps me out. And the locked door would open by itself from time to time. There were other incidents as well that I really can't explain. We would very frequently have a sense of anxiety and foreboding in the house, which on its own isn't paranormal, but certainly made it a very uneasy stay being there. I read somewhere that radon exposure can cause anxiety, and the house did have radon problems, so maybe that could have been it. But I also would hear footsteps around the house when I was the only one there, and just constantly felt like someone was watching me. My dad got the worst of it and claimed he would hear sounds coming from the basement at night. His bedroom was right near it, whereas mine was upstairs. So I never heard any of it, but I'm an extremely deep sleeper. Then the traditional slams, bangs, and crashes throughout the house. My dad also claimed that he would hear knocking on the cellar door. Sometimes he would hear a woman screaming. Supposedly every family who had ever lived there experienced something. There are 3 distinct things that stand out. The night before we moved out, my dad claims he woke up because he felt a sudden hard tapping on his head. My brother's girlfriend was staying over and my dad and me were gone. We came back to find that his girlfriend's daughter was terrified because she saw a shadow in the corner of the room. I chalked it up to a kid's imagination running wild. One time my dad was practicing with his band in the basement and was expecting me to be back from a Christmas party. He claims he heard heavy footsteps from upstairs and thought it was me. So he went upstairs to greet me, and no one was home. I got home about a half an hour later. It got to the point where my dad had the house blessed, and the priest claims to have been terrified and refused to go into the house at first. This was around the time I was becoming an atheist, so I didn't really believe in any of that. But I definitely experienced the uneasiness and occasional random noises, but never experienced any of the screaming or knocking my dad claims to have heard. At one point, we had some people from TAPS, associated with, but not on the Ghost Hunters show, visit us and do a sweep of the house. We got some of the obvious quote-unquote orb pictures, which both me and my brother thought were kind of dumb as hell. But at one point, being a bit of an edgelord, thinking I had psychic powers, told them to take pictures in one specific spot. The results was an image of what appeared to be a ghost, of a person with a demented face. We tried to explain it as a reflection from the washing machine, but it looked too much like a person. My husband and I own a martial arts school, and the building that it's in, which we also own, is about 130 years old, next to a church. And I never, and still don't really, there's been another explanation, believe in the paranormal, but the things that happened in it didn't just happen to me. It was a decrepit, which is why it was so cheap to purchase, and we basically did all the work ourselves, old, creaky, and drafty. Still knob and tube that we had to get an electrician to change out. So here's a bunch of things that happened. When we'd be working with like drills and electric saws, I hear the tinkling of a music box, and I stop everyone to ask if they hear it too. No one else did, so I assumed it must have been some music from the church coming through. My husband would often hear a woman's voice calling his name from the bottom of the stairs. It's 2 floors, a basement, and a loft. And thinking it was me back from work, would always ask for it to come up. Turns out the building was empty. Happened 4 or 5 times. One night there's a small apartment on the 2nd floor connected to a large hall. We woke up hearing what sounded like a broom sweeping across the wooden floor in the large hall. My husband got up to go check, but once he would walk in there, the sweeping sound would stop. It happened 3 more times that night. We chalked it up to mice or squirrels. And we did find mummified squirrels in the attic once. We had a barbecue in the backyard, and I needed to go get some utensils. There's a metal stairwell from the backyard up to the 2nd floor, and then there's the main entrance staircase opposite to that. I came up the main entrance and heard footsteps pacing back and forth across the far end of the hall, and thought my husband came up from the metal stairwell to get utensils with me. It was dark, and I couldn't see anything. I called out for him, and the pacing stopped. No response, and then the pacing footsteps continued. Annoyed, I thought that he was just messing with me, so I flipped on the lights, and all the utensils from the shelf where I heard the pacing crashed down to the floor. Like I spooked something, but there wasn't anything. Not even a rat, like I thought there might be. One Saturday morning, my husband was on his computer in another room. I'm at the apartment playing with the Tamagotchi app on my iPad when I heard the stereo sitting in front of me click on, and a girl's voice started talking from it. I thought he controlled the stereo from his computer, so I ignored it because he often pulls music to work out before class started. He teaches the morning class. I do remember thinking, what kind of weird-ass indie music is he listening to anyway? Because the voice just said, "Hi, my name is..." Thought I heard Katie, but I'm not 100% sure because I wasn't paying attention. I've never known a Katie in my life. I am blank years old, and I'm from blank. I didn't catch the specifics because I wasn't really listening, but that went on for about 2 or 3 minutes until it suddenly went, "Something's hurting me." And when I caught that, I looked up and squinted at the stereo like, what? Something's killing me. Something killed me. At this point, the hair is standing on the back of my neck and I'm getting up from the couch to take a closer look. Please, someone tell my parents. Tell the teachers. Tell the corrections officer. At the word corrections officer, I just bolted into the other room and started yelling at my husband and cursing him out because I was certain that he was playing a trick on me. I told him, we don't fucking play jokes about dead people. And he's, of course, looking at me like, what the fuck? When he finally calms me down to get what I heard out of me and what I was accusing him of, he told me it was impossible and led me into the stereo. It's not plugged in. Thought maybe the stereo picked up on the signals from the ebook or something. After that last fiasco, I went to ask my live-in student who lived with his girlfriend in the basement if anything weird was happening. They shot each other an alarmed look and told me this. His girlfriend was sleeping one night when he was working overnight, and she heard footsteps come down from the stairs and their door open and then close. All of a sudden, a bright flashlight shines in her face, and she just kind of can make out a silhouette of who she thought was her boyfriend, because he's tall, and she can see the dirty jeans that he's wearing. She's annoyed thinking he's messing with her, so she's swatting up at him, telling him to stop. Finally, she gets so pissed that she rolls and turns on their lamp and there's no one there. They sometimes hear footsteps on the first floor when there's no one in the building. They had a pet mouse at the time, and whenever that happened, it would just start doing backflips in its tank. However, when class is going on and there's people in the building, the mouse didn't care and just went about his mousy business. They were play wrestling one day when suddenly their African gray parrot ruffled its feathers and in a really alarmed voice asked, "Who's there? Who's there?" They thought it was funny at first, so our student looked at the bird and pointed to the door and said, "You mean over there?" and ran toward the door to open it. As he did, all the books that were lining the shelf on the way to the door fell over in front of him, and the lights started flickering. The bird and the mouse both got spooked and were throwing themselves against their cages. Our second live-in student after the first one got married to his girlfriend, got their own home and had a baby. Several times, could not find his phone, and he woke up in the morning where he had placed it next to his bed the night before. He would search his room high and low, and then he'd find it perfectly placed right outside his locked bedroom door on the floor. I thought he might have sleepwalked, but his girlfriend says that she realized that if he did, he was a really light sleeper, so don't know about that. Nothing notable has happened since then, but we've also had just anyone stay there overnight in years. Cicadas are outside. Be right back. I lived in a house that seemed to be haunted by doppelgangers. Every event that happened never involved some mysterious figure, but a known person being in the place where they shouldn't have been. Here's a few examples. I was a teenager at the time, and I was instant messaging my girlfriend at that same time with my webcam turned on. I had the viewer up so I could see myself in the webcam, and behind me, there was the stairs leading up, left of my camera view, and the entrance to the living room, right of the camera view. My younger sister would typically fall asleep every night on the couch in front of the TV and make her way up to bed in the middle of the night. At one point in my webcam view, I saw my sister leaving the room and went to go upstairs. The thing that struck me as odd was that I didn't hear anything. It was an older Victorian house, so the wooden floor and stairs were loud as fuck. Without saying anything to my girlfriend, I got up and looked into the living room, and there was my sister passed out on the couch. I sat back down and asked my girlfriend if she had seen anything in the camera. She said, "Yeah, I just saw your sister go upstairs." My family was all getting ready to go somewhere. I was sitting in the car with my mom, and we were all waiting on my sister, who was still in the house. After a bit, she comes out and gets into the car and just looks at me like, "What the fuck?" I ask her what's wrong, and she says that just before she walked out of the house, she thought I was still inside, so she yelled up the stairs. Obviously, we're leaving, and apparently I yell back, "Okay, I'll be down in a minute." Is it possible a ghost lives in my house, or am I just paranoid? I live in a pretty old house made in the 60s. Apparently, the owner built her whole neighborhood. It's gone through a few owners before us. The one before us, a nice elderly couple. My guess is it's the dude who first built the place. I think he passed and still loves the house, so he just wanders it whenever. I'm fine with the dude. I'm guessing he's just trying to kind of get a kick out of me crying and running off to my mom when I hear him messing around in the kitchen or the living room. Things will fall. Just minutes ago, something in my room fell randomly while I was out scrapping the wall with it. I think he means scraping the wall with it, and I can't seem to find whatever it was. Lights will flicker randomly. Random noises such as the light being switched on will ring out in the dead of night. My LED lights flashed white when they weren't on, and loud noise was made. Noises go on throughout my house. Anything from creaks to things falling in other rooms. Sometimes I'll be sitting in my room when things like a bag of markers, placed on even ground, such as my desks, will fall without warning. Sometimes my door will close and open slowly without me doing anything, like a soft gust opened it. Sometimes I'll hear soft footsteps and think it's my cat, when there's nothing. I'll go into the living room only for noises such as a single hit on a pongo drum, not even faint, just right there, barely out of sight. I don't know what the old man wants. I guess he's bored not interacting and watching me stare at my phone all day. That, or it's my family, but I'm not very close to anyone that's passed within it. Perhaps it's my great-grandparents watching over me, making sure we're safe. Or I'm hella paranoid and none of this means anything and can be explained in simple terms. I'd like feedback to prove me wrong and tell me it's just my anxiety so I can stop overthinking this stuff. I'm not a big ghost believer, but this just seems like too much of a coincidence. Especially my stuff being moved around when I know for a fact I haven't touched any of it. Cursed land, haunted forest, demon. My wife's uncle, Jay, bought some land just north of Spokane, Washington, with a friend of the family that we're going to call Kay. They got it at a significant discount because a nearby aluminum smelter had polluted the ground and it was impossible to use the water beneath the ground. They had set up 2 plots and each had a camper to live in. Jay had been progressively getting paranoid and saying people were stalking him and watching him in the trees. About 3 months into living there, a man wandered through the woods and had an interaction with Jay and ended up attacking him and breaking his jaw. Upon being arrested, the man said that he was overcome with the desire to see if he could kill him with a single punch. Weird. 2 months later, Jay was murdered in his sleep on the couch in his camper. Kay found him and immediately ran as far away until he stopped to call the police. There was sufficient evidence of who did it, and they quickly caught the killer, who was a 19-year-old boy who said he simply wanted his bike. He beat him to death with the power tool that was lying on the floor nearby, completely bashed his brains in. Kay was completely terrified at all times to be there alone. He had moved in with a family member until 8 months later. He ended up with nowhere else to go and had to return. In constant fear, he finally convinced my pregnant wife and I to come stay with him. The second I turned off the highway onto the property, I was overcome with dread. There were at least 250 crows covering the dirt road up to the property. I didn't sleep whatsoever the first night. I stared into the forest, searching for the cause of my intense fear. The energy of this place was so uncomfortable, and I assumed it was simply just knowing Uncle Jay was killed here. Even the days were eerie. Never did I have a moment where I didn't feel watched here. My wife and I always had the sense of fear, especially after dark. Things sort of normalized for a while, until one day Kay began puking and feeling very lightheaded all the time. I took him to the hospital, and they said that he was fine, probably a flu. At this point, it was the anniversary of Jay's murder. 3 days after the date of Jay's death, Kay comes running out of his camper, screaming. I can't breathe. Waking my wife, we just run up to see what's wrong. Kay had gotten into his car and floored it, crashing into a nearby tree. I run up and peer through the window to see the most intense and most primal fear I've ever seen in someone's eyes. He was gasping and clutching his chest. Moments later, he breathed out one last time, and he was dead. On July 10th, 1 year and 3 days after moving there, they were both dead. Now it's only me and the wife alone on the property. Every moment living in fear and not understanding what had happened here. I don't know why we didn't leave right away. One day I come out to get fresh water from a drum that we keep for water, to smell the worst smell I'd ever smelled. The water containing had a 1-inch opening on the top, and inside the water was bits and pieces of chipmunks, like spines and heads. They didn't fall in. Something ripped them apart before putting them inside. The nights were getting worse and worse. I never saw anything, just always filled with unease, hearing crashing and footsteps every night. One night, my wife and I returned home to having the worst feeling I've ever felt. Everything looked different. Although everything was right where we had left it, nothing seemed in place. Looking around, I suddenly see this orange, long-haired, manged cat sitting on a stump. This cat's eyes were so intense, fiery, almost glowing, but not quite. We start hearing branches snapping, pine needles crunching, seemingly from every direction. I'm still staring at this cat, almost frozen in fear. Suddenly, a voice breaks out, echoing throughout the forest. "Hello, is anyone out there?" A little girl, I thought, but something was off. My wife yells back, "Hello, are you okay? Anybody?" The voice had changed. "Help me!" We yell back several times with no response. "Somebody fucking help me!" The most intense shrieking. Evil sounding. I'm filled with more intense fear than I can even describe. But my wife, she's overcome with the need to find this person. She started to head off into the forest without a word. I grabbed her by the arm and tell her something isn't right. Why won't she respond to us? She tries to break free for me to go off alone. I tell her to get into the truck and I'll grab the spotlights. We aren't going on foot. We rolled the windows down and shined my intensely bright flashlights throughout the forest. We slowly creep down the road yelling back. As we get further down the road, the voice strikes out. "Please, won't anyone fucking help?" Sounds are difficult to pin down in the woods, but this one was very close. I hit the brakes and stop immediately. We shine the lights and yell back, searching. No sign of anyone. When suddenly, the voice explodes into the cabin of the vehicle as if they were standing right outside my window. "Help me! Somebody fucking help!" Leaving my ears hurting and ringing. I hit the gas and didn't look back. Called the police when I hit the highway, and afterwards they said that there was no one around. I picked up our stuff the next day and my wife gave birth the following day. We never stayed there again after the baby was born. What the hell could do these things? The fire or something else that burnt my house. So let me explain what happened. Even if I'm scared to have some answers, I'm going to ask for your help, because I need those answers. I had multiple encounters since the first memories I have. I can't tell everything in one post, sadly. Maybe I'll do other posts if you're interested in helping me, because I'm also wondering if some of my encounters are maybe related to each other. Specifically this one. So, I'll explain to you the best way I can what happened in the beginning of my childhood. My parents split when I was 8 years old. My brother was 4 or 5. Our house was burnt around 2 years before they broke up, and we were rebuilding a new house at the same place afterwards, like on top of the other burnt house that was no longer existing. I don't know if it can be related or not to some of my other encounters, but if so, it would make a lot of sense. And since it was a huge marking part of my childhood, I judged it to be pretty important to mention it at first. When the fire took place, my mom was home alone with my brother, around 1600 hours. My dad was still at work, and I was at my grandparents' house. I remember my dad calling me to tell me that the house was burning and me having almost no reaction. Somewhat normal for a 6-year-old, I think. But I always and still have a weird feeling about the first house that burnt. I have chills just thinking about it, having no clear memory before the fire. Something was wrong in there, like very bad and dark, and I don't know what it was. I remember the dig after the fire to redo the foundation of the new house, and even then, I still had this weird feeling. That weird feeling being there and looking into the big hole. So I was told by my mom and my dad that my mom accidentally started the fire emptying an ashtray into the garbage can in the basement, that maybe a cigarette was not fully extinguished, and because the house was old as fuck, it burnt like a peck of matches. I don't know in what year the house was built. I'll have to check with my parents tomorrow and update the post. I kinda always doubted their explanations, even when I was 6 years old. What makes it weirder to me is that even if I asked my mother 100 times if she ever encountered something before or after the fire, anywhere, anything, she always told me that she didn't want to talk or hear about paranormal stuff and prefer to not believe in it at all, which gives it power. I still told her many things that I experienced or witnessed since, but she always stopped me or put her hands on her ears, so never gone deep in what happened to me, which scared me even more. My dad always had an open mind, and still has, just not that much into paranormal stuff. He never doubted me when I talked to him about my encounters, but he didn't give me explanations or anything. He always told me that those things that we have no power of actions, and that they just happen sometimes, and that they're not dangerous because they can't reach us or hurt us because we're protected by our guardian angels. But each time I asked him about the fire, he always told me the same thing, that my mom caused it by accident. but he always had and have what seems to be a fear or sadness in his eyes. Just very weird. My dad's a strong and tall man, so out of habit for him to say the least. I never insisted further after his responses because I knew and know in my heart that it still's triggering him to this day. I know my mom would never intentionally set fire to the house. She's mentally totally fine. I think or I know that it's something else. I don't believe in the accidental fire because none of my parents were giving me stories enough to convince me. It always seemed to me that they were both keeping things for them, and I just always knew deep inside it was something else. I don't know if I'm an empath or what, but I know what I'm feeling and seeing, and some of these other people can't. I had a lot of encounters, but I'm still concerned about that house, the fire, and what caused it. The Smiling Woman. My siblings and I seem to have all had experiences with the same spirit. My sister and I have only caught a glimpse, but my brother's gotten a good look many times. The spirit has a stereotypical horror movie look to it. It appears as a pale woman, average height, thin with long dark hair, down to at least her waist. Her hair is dirty, oily down to its ends, so it almost looks wet. She wears a white dress or gown, also very dirty and yellowed. Her feet are dirty too. She seems to always appear barefoot. Her skin is sickly white and veiny. I also saw her once and got the impression that she was ill, like physically diseased. My brother's the only one of us who's seen her face. He says anytime he's seen her, she's looking right at him, usually standing over him when he's laying down or looming behind him, smiling excessively, like she means to taunt him. He woke up to see her standing beside his bed, most nights, for a year or more. She says she made him too scared to move, that she was smiling but looked like she hated him. I think he said she whispered something to that effect to him before, but even saw her in the backseat of his car once and almost crashed. I've only seen her once in a dream. In the dream, I'm standing in the bedroom, and 3 of us had to share the small apartment that we moved into right after our parents divorced. It's dark in the room, but I can see the lamp in the living room is on, so I walk to it. Standing in the living room, I see that the light is on in the kitchen. The kitchen had a bar above the countertop and a row of cabinets drilled into the ceiling. So they made a long, narrow window. The woman was suspended in the air, lying flat like on a bed. The first thing I saw was her oily hair dangling. Then I noticed the backs of her arms and hands, her dress hanging from her, the backs of her calves, and the dirty black heels of her feet. She was high enough off the ground that the upper cabinets blocked everything else. The dream had an uncomfortable feeling, like I had sort of wandered in and was seeing something I wasn't supposed to. I remember being afraid of her and wanting to leave before she noticed me. Then I woke up, and that was it. My brother and I were swapping ghost stories a few years later, and I told him about it. He'd never mentioned his experiences with the woman to me before that, and spilled it all after. I asked why he'd never brought her up, and he said seeing her made him feel crazy. He felt relieved when he heard that I saw her too. We called my sister up and asked if she'd ever seen anything in the many places that we'd lived in as kids, making a point not to share what we had talked about. She eventually told us she'd seen the dark silhouette of a woman with long hair and light-colored dress one night, watching her from the hallway of the apartment in my dream, the divorce apartment. She and my brother were both awake for their experiences. My sister experienced sleep paralysis for the first time in the divorce apartment. She never saw anything when this happened, just felt something malevolent in the room with her. Her sleep paralysis continued on to my grandmother's apartment, who they moved in with after I got married and moved away. That's where and around the time my brother started seeing her. She tormented him for a long time. I didn't have my dream until some years after she stopped, and he hasn't seen her since. I think about it a lot and wonder sometimes where she is now, how long she followed us around, why she was so bold and aggressive with my brother, but not my sister and I, and why she stopped. For my brother's sake, I'm glad that she did. Spirit in my apartment, but I'm the only one affected. So I had been staying at my boyfriend's apartment for several months before I officially moved in around the middle of May. Everything was fine and I felt no need to be nervous or scared. Then a couple of weeks later, weird stuff started happening. Everything started out pretty simple, with items moving to different places when they were gone for a bit. I just thought maybe I was crazy and forgot where I'd put the stuff. Then bowls falling in the kitchen. They'd fall so far, they'd end up in the hallway. A few minutes after a bowl would fall, my cat would stare at something a few feet away from me and hiss. She was genuinely terrified and was shaking. Then I started hearing the knocking. It's always in sets of threes, and it's always a pretty quick but consistent knock. It would happen randomly throughout the day, and was just in random walls or doors throughout the house. Yesterday, however, really freaked me out. My boyfriend convinced me that we had a mouse or something in the house, and I agreed. I had set a cup on the floor next to my bed, because we don't currently have a bedside table. I'm relaxing and I hear a noise like the cup being pushed. I thought it was the cat and I tried to ignore it. It happened again and again until I looked up and saw the cup moving across the floor on its own. As soon as I picked up the cup, I heard clothes falling in the closet and the 3 knocks on the closet door. I felt a pain in my chest, like someone was pushing hard, and I bolted out of the house. The problem here is that everyone thinks I'm crazy. It only ever happens when I'm alone in the house, or when I'm the only one awake. I tried using sage. That only seemed to make whatever it is more active. I'm at a loss for what to do, and I hate feeling like I'm insane when I know what I'm seeing and hearing. I just don't know what to do at this point. Seeing figures in my room. What could it be? Anyways, I want to start off by saying that I find the paranormal super interesting and love to read through stuff. But I tend to be rather a skeptic. But I still think that I have experienced things. A little backstory. I have a vacation house in a small village in Italy where I spend most of my summers. We only have 2 bedrooms there, so I mostly share a bed with one person, depending on who's accompanying me that year. I always get an uneasy feeling in that house, which I'll probably talk about in future posts. The story I want to talk about today started in 2017. That year, I flew to Italy with my grandparents and shared the bed with my grandma. At that time, I wasn't into the paranormal yet. Didn't even watch any horror movies. Long story short, I went to bed one night and woke up at random times, but still had my eyes closed. I then opened them to check out what time it was on my phone, but right when I opened them, I saw a figure resembling a woman with short blonde hair. She wore a white tank top, and as corny as it sounds, she was almost a bit see-through. After a few seconds, I realized what I was looking at and immediately jumped up and the figure was gone. I just brushed it off by saying that it was a bad dream. I didn't really think about what I saw long after. A few days later, I woke up again. I opened my eyes, but this time I didn't see the woman, but instead a young girl standing very close to me. This time I was so terrified that I turned around to wake up my grandma, and once I looked back, the kid was gone. I haven't experienced it since, which is why I didn't even think about it anymore. 3 weeks ago, my parents, siblings, and me went back to Italy. My sister and brother slept on the bed together. My brother on the side where I would sleep in 2017, and I slept on a mattress on the floor. After the first night, my brother wouldn't step foot in the room anywhere. He slept with my parents the whole 2 weeks, even cried when he told my mom about what he saw. So, what did he see? A very tall, probably around 7 foot tall man. He kept hovering over and around Eve, me, is what he said. I've not told my brother about what I saw a few years ago, because he was 13 and I didn't want to scare him. Does someone have any idea what all this could be about? Ghost Boy and Shadows at our old house. When I was smaller, we lived in a typical suburban type house with a pool and a very large yard. I wouldn't call the house haunted, but there were a few weird things going on that I'd like to share. This happened to me around the ages of 7 to 10 years of age, as we moved out to another town when I was 10. There were 3 activities that took place. From the living room, you could see out into the dining room. There was a 3-seater couch that sort of defined the bounds of the 2 spaces. I initially thought my eyes were playing a trick, but occasionally while playing in the living room, I would notice a short boy walk past the couch. However, you would see nothing but only the top of his head. Think of Dennis the Menace haircut, except his hair was more of a hazelnut color. I would see this boy walking past the couch at least weekly. It looked exactly like another person would. It was only some months later, when my mother was sitting with me in the living room, both staring out toward the dining room, that I noticed the boy's head walk past the couch and my mother reacting to it, and asked if I had seen a child walk past. That was when I told her that I see him fairly often, but I don't ever see him in any other part of him other than his head. She also admitted that she would see something from the corner of her eyes at times, but thought it was just her imagination. Later on, my brother, a year younger, also confirmed that he would see the boy. It was really weird, because it was just the top of his head you would see. You'd never see his eyes. You would never stop. He never ever called out to anyone or made a sound. Always just a head walking past the couch. I never felt any presence or anything weird. The second thing that would happen, which took place a couple times a year, was when I would play outside. I would hear call my name. It was more of a feminine voice. And it was like a loud whisper, but from the distance. This always happened when I was alone in the yard. It was definitely not my mother, as sometimes my mother was gone out shopping or at work. I always felt like I was being watched and that the air would become colder. This would happen even during the day, and it always happened outside of the house. I don't ever recall it taking place inside. the last thing that would happen is I saw shadows that moved. Shadow people, according to Reddit. Only some years later, I found out that my brother also regularly saw them. I once brought it up to my mother, who used to say that it's from watching too much television or just my mind playing tricks. Now the shadows were always out of the corner of my eyes. Like as soon as you try to focus on them, they would disappear around corners. Or if I was walking down the passageway and I turn around, I would see closer to me about a meter or so, but it would run away and disappear around the corner or behind a door. I felt as if I caught them red-handed, and they would scurry away as they were too afraid to be seen. It was always one shadow at a time, but I got the feeling that it was a different shadow being, not one constant one. They were slightly skinny, and I could never see the outline of any clothing items. I never saw shadows anywhere else except for that house. My brother was the only person to see them. My parents never did. I put that down to being kids or more sensitive to paranormal encounters. Woman called me by the esoteric name of a main character from a creative writing exercise with my therapist. It didn't mean much at first, but then I started taking it more seriously when my therapist suggested I do so. The main character is obviously a stand-in for myself, and in true fashion struggles with being surrounded by violence and being forced to elicit it on others to defend himself, other people, and appear tough. The main character's name is very specific. I chose the name because its meaning is very specific to my experience. It's Latin, and it's totally different from my name. It's no longer in circulation. If you met someone with this name, you'd think they're a fucking freak. There was a middle-aged woman at the local mart that I felt strangely drawn toward. I often felt safe around her, which is important to me because I don't feel safe around a lot of people. We always had, and still have, brief friendly interactions. I always enter my rewards phone card number, and every time I do, my real name pops up in the screen, which is typical in Western. She never called me by my first name, but I was a regular, as was my father. But one day she approached me out of the blue and was like, "Your name's fill in the blank, right?" And call me the name from the story. I got chills and felt my face get hot. I said, "No," and introduced myself, and she said, "Oh, my fault. Have a nice day." It's just so fucking eerie, I still can't believe it myself. Like I said, it's an old Latin word or a name, and it's not only uncommon, but just generally unheard of. I'm at a loss for words. The figure in the rear view. I'm a 34-year-old male. This happened to me and my brother when I was around 18 years old. He's 20 years old. Take it or leave it, we both know it to be true. We drove home at about 11 p.m. one night after visiting a friend on the other side of the town. We were sitting in my brother's car smoking a cigarette before we went inside. We lived in an old weatherboard house with a straight driveway about 15 meters long. Across the other side of the road from our driveway, a 10-foot-high brick fence had been freshly painted white, glaringly bright. The street we lived on was well lit, and we lived right next door to a Woolworths parking lot. House is 47 Smythe Street, Benalla, Victoria. House is 47 Smythe Street, Benalla, Victoria, Australia. Now vacant for a long time. As we sat there smoking, my brother says to me, "Take a look in the rear view." I grabbed the mirror and turned it toward myself. Standing directly behind the car, just off the boundary of our driveway, was a solid black figure, perfectly contrasted against the white brick fence on the other side of the road. The figure looked to be a female with a jacket on, and her hair looked wet. I turned around to look at the figure and there was nothing there. I spun back around the figure but was still standing there in the mirror, faced directly towards us. I spun around again to look with my own eyes, and once again there was nothing there. I turned for a final time back to the mirror, and the solid black figure was still standing there, pointed directly to us, not 15 meters away. At this point, every hair in my body stood on end, and my mind went into a state of complete confusion, disbelief, and non-acceptance. I jumped out of the car and ran to the spot where the figure should have been. I ran to the fence that's shared with the car park. The car park was empty. Nothing was on the street. Prior to my brother telling me to look, he had already done this triple take himself. House with an evil spirit. When I was 10, we had just moved into the nicest house we'd have ever been to that day. It was big, a huge sunken living room, bonus room off the kitchen, a great backyard. My parents rushed on buying it because it was such a good deal. Just a few days in, I saw a shadow figure that was about 3 feet tall, and it had a top hat of sorts. I'd catch it from the corner of my eye often, but especially near my brother's room. It seemed like it always was standing just in the doorway and would be quick to get out of sight. Pictures on the wall would sort of lean more and more throughout the day, and I often heard door creaks and footprints, but more like a galloping cadence coming from the attic. One night my dad and I were watching TV. He was channel surfing and stopped on some show where people talked about their paranormal experience. I don't remember the show, but wish I did. Anyway, the person being interviewed mentions the shadow person that she's seeing, and it was exactly what I had been experiencing. Up until then, I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want to scare my younger siblings and my parents, who were kind of excited about the new house. I started to get really scared listening to it, so I told my dad about all I saw. He asked me where I saw it and other details, and I'll never forget how white he turned when he realized we both were seeing and hearing the same thing. He told me that he saw it every day since we moved in, and he always saw it near my brother's room. That night, I woke up in a panic from a dream, although it seemed more like a vision about the spirit hurting my brother and not a typical nightmare. I ran into my parents' room where my dad was sitting straight up in his bed, breathing fast. I told him about the dream, and before I could finish, he said he was hurting Peter. I said yes, but I wasn't sure because the shadow man just seemed to be next to the bed watching as my brother was being tended to by nurses. My dad had the exact same dream that same night. The following night, my mom was tucking us in, and I heard her panic as my brother was burning up. Fever of 105, and was really weak and out of it. He got taken by an ambulance to the hospital, and we were told that he had pneumonia. He was sick for 2 weeks. We only went back to the house during the day to get our things. We moved in with my aunt temporarily and listed the house for sale. So would have I. My cat visited. Smiley face. My 2-year-old boy passed away Thursday. He had a heart murmur that turned into CHF. Despite his illness, this was a kitty that loved to play, cuddle, explore, attack feet, and leave scars. He passed unexpectedly at the vet when I brought him in for an unrelated checkup. When he passed, I asked him to come visit me. I asked him to send me another kitty that was him when the time was right. I talk to him sometimes as if he were around, and I'm a firm believer that he is. Although yesterday during the day, I felt heavily like my house was incomplete without a third kitty. I had a long, ugly cry and looked at some pictures of him. His eyes stood out to me at how piercing they are. Cut to this morning. I'm in that odd state of between sleep and semi-consciousness. I'm dreaming that I'm walking toward my dresser when something urges me to look behind me, and there he was. Storm was in his sideways loaf position, and we immediately made eye contact. That's when I knew it was him, just like in my dreams of my grandma. He looked healthy and rounder. And like in the dreams of her, this felt so real. Unfortunately, that's where my dream ends, as my mom's dog woke me up to let him in. I would have loved to spend some time with him, but it feels nice to know that he's around, to have a reminder that my house always does, in fact, have 3 kitties. My husband says not to go to the bathroom at night if the light doesn't turn on. So I live in a 2-bedroom townhome. Not sure how long this place has been here, but I'm not sure if it's old enough for paranormal stuff, or if anything sinister has happened here. But I'd say at least 20 years old. We've been here for a little over 4 years. We've had some incidents where our stairs give off a vibe, and my husband, who said that he's seen things, said there's an entity on our stairs. I'd say a couple of years back when I saw something reflect on our TV in the living room facing the stairs, but I can't be sure what it was. Nothing has ever really happened. We have cats. They lay on the stairs and don't seem spooked. We also had children during their living here. And I've had dreams before where a dark entity tried to attack my children and I pushed it back. Like used some weird force shit. My daughter says weird shit sometimes also, like the window is scary and they don't like the lights off. But I've chalked it up to kids being kids who are scared of the dark. Last night, though, was weird as fuck. I've always used a light to get from our bedroom to the bathroom, or just turned the hallway light on. And the bathroom is right next to the stairs. I've always turned the light on the stairs because, to be honest, it does freak me out a little bit for some reason. Like something watching me pee. But I also do it for the cats, because they have to go downstairs and eat and stuff. This time, though, I walked to my bathroom and turned the light on like always, except it didn't turn on. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, it could be a faulty switch or the light bulb burned out, except there's 3 light bulbs, and they all didn't turn on. I wasn't exactly afraid, but thought it was weird. So I just went to pee and went to bed. Nothing happened. The next morning, the lights turn on. There was no blackout either, because the hall lights were all on too. Well, I told my husband, and he looked at me all serious. He said, "Next time that happens, go back to bed or go to the other bathroom downstairs and don't look out the window." There's a window in the upstairs bathroom because they didn't put a vent in the bathroom. He didn't explain what exactly the entity was, so I came on here to see if there's some sort of lore of an entity that shuts off lights or something and takes people. Don't know if that helps with the lore. I'd also like to add, I think something does follow me or watch me sometimes. I get weird feelings at night. One time I used one of those heat and ghost finding app things that show you a trail or something. The whole screen filled up, which meant it was right on me. I get that feeling now, but I'm not super paranoid as a person. I'd be more likely to tell people to stop the shit before hiding under the covers and being scared. My husband and his mom, she's a witch, but not sure what kind, say they're seeing things. Now in her house, I've smelt strange things, which my husband says is a native. My nose and the instincts pick up on things, but not my sight. No smells in my own home, just flickers of things. I guess my question is, what the heck am I dealing with? I don't think it's hostile, just curious. Though my husband says don't interact, I'm still gonna pee in my own bathroom. Ain't no way I'm going downstairs. maybe we should listen to our elders more. My mom mentioned that she had very few minor supernatural experiences, but one incident stood out in particular. For those who may not be familiar with the Philippines, it's important to know that Filipinos tend to be very superstitious, especially in the more rural areas, or provincia in Filipino, as compared to larger cities like Manila. My mom lived a tough life. Her dad was a deadbeat who abandoned my mom, my grandmother, and her siblings. Consequently, my grandmother raised them single-handedly. Good job. During her teenage years, a neighbor from the house next door passed away, and my mom's family was invited to the wake. An elderly woman at the wake issued a series of rules to my mom and her family. 1. Don't bring home food from the wake. 2. If you or a friend visiting are pregnant, don't look inside the coffin. 3. Before leaving the wake, perform a pagpag, which involves shaking and jumping up and down to prevent the spirit from following you home. 4. After the wake, avoid returning home immediately. Go somewhere else for a while so the spirit doesn't follow you. Though my mom and grandmother weren't superstitious people, they didn't take these rules seriously and returned home after just 2 hours at the wake, breaking one of the rules. That night, my mom had nightmares about the deceased Tita and woke up in the early morning, around 4 or 5:30 a.m., not 3. When she went to get a glass of water in the small kitchen, she saw someone standing outside the door frame, resembling the deceased Tita. Frightened, she rushed back to the room where they all slept together, as their house had only one room. She shared what she saw with my grandmother, who checked around the house but found no one. The next day, an albularo, a type of folk doctor who deals with supernatural matters, came to their house. The albulario was whispering around, doing something related to the supernatural. Later that night, the elderly lady who had issued the rules came to their house and expressed her anger at my grandmother for breaking the rules. According to her, the spirit of the deceased neighbor had followed them home due to this disrespect, and it was essential to always follow the rules. This experience made my mom wonder whether there might be some truth to the superstitions the elderly share with us as kids, and that they aren't merely meant to scare us into obedience. And no matter how silly these superstitions sound, that maybe, just maybe, there's some truth to them. I also asked my grandmother about this incident over the phone, and she confirmed that it did indeed happen. She went to the neighbor's house the following day and informed them about what had occurred with my mom. Upon hearing the details, the neighbors promptly called an albulario to perform a ritual or prayer. And that was at their house, hopefully to help the spirit move on.